Concept assembly line, where ideas get to work. On a humid July afternoon, a family in northern New Jersey opens their utility bill and freezes. Last month's statement was already high. This one is nearly 20% higher. The air conditioning hasn't changed, the lights are the same, and the family even tried running their dishwasher late at night to save money. But here, in black and white, is the number, hundreds of dollars owed, with no clear explanation of why. This is the starting point for most voters. Electricity is supposed to be boring. It hums invisibly in the background, flipping on the lights, powering the fridge, and charging the phone without much thought. In a state like New Jersey, where incomes are already stretched by property taxes, healthcare, and commuting costs, a surprise electricity hike feels less like an inconvenience and more like a betrayal. Families read headlines about solar and wind farms coming online, about panels on rooftops and batteries in basements, about technologies that produce power with no ongoing fuel cost. They are told renewables are free once built. Yet their bills march upward. Abundance is supposed to mean relief, but instead it feels like scarcity priced at a premium. To understand why bills rise even as fuel-free renewables expand, we have to follow the current upstream, from the retail bill a family receives, back to the wholesale markets where prices are set, and further still into the design of those markets. It's not enough to know that electricity is expensive. We need to know why, who benefits, and what choices politicians make in response. Most Americans never think about the vast regional operators that manage their electricity. In New Jersey, the invisible hand belongs to PJM Interconnection, a non-profit market operator that coordinates the grid for 65 million people across 13 states and the District of Columbia. PJM is both a traffic cop and an auctioneer. It ensures electrons flow reliably across transmission lines, and it runs competitive markets where power plants bid to supply electricity. The first principle of these markets is simple but counterintuitive. The marginal generator sets the price. Every 5 minutes, PJM forecasts demand and stacks available supply bids from cheapest to most expensive. Nuclear and renewables usually bid near zero because their fuel cost is zero. Efficient gas plants come next, followed by coal, oil, and finally peaker plants that run only a few hours a year. PJM clears the auction by taking the cheapest bids until demand is met. The price of the last, most expensive unit needed sets the locational marginal price, LMP, for everyone in that zone. Most of the time, the wholesale price reflects the middle of the stack, low enough to keep bills manageable, high enough to cover costs. But when demand surges on sweltering afternoons, when air conditioners strain the grid, PJM has to call on peaker plants with costs many times higher. At the steep end of the stack, adding even a few hundred megawatts can fling the clearing price from $50 per megawatt hour to $200, $300, or more. Scarcity pricing is not a flaw of the system, it's the design. By allowing prices to spike during tight hours, PJM creates incentives for investors to build new capacity. But for consumers, it feels like ransom. The family in northern New Jersey is not buying gas from a peaker plant directly, but when that peaker sets the marginal price, every electron they consume is billed as though it came from the costliest source. The consequence is volatility at the wholesale level, spikes in scarcity events, and a drift upward when capacity auctions clear higher. But volatility is not what shows up on a household bill. Retail rates are designed to disguise it. If wholesale markets are a storm, Retail pricing is the umbrella. Utilities like JCP&L do not expose households to the 5-minute churn of PJM auctions. Instead, they act as translators, taking volatility and turning it into something consumers can live with. A stable number printed on a bill. JCP&L and other utilities buy electricity in a mix of ways: long-term contracts, seasonal blocks, short-term purchases. They hedge with financial products to smooth out swings. Then, every few months or years, they file rate cases with the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, which reviews average costs and sets retail rates. The effect is an illusion of calm, predictable bills birthed from very unpredictable markets. A family plugs in their refrigerator and pays 13 cents per kilowatt hour as though that number were permanent and ordained. In reality, the 13 cents is a rolling average of hundreds of fluctuating wholesale prices. Behind the curtain, power might have cleared at 3 cents 1 hour and 40 cents the next. The retail rate is a blend, the umbrella shielding households from weather they rarely see. This design has advantages. It makes bills predictable, allows households to budget, and prevents political whiplash every time wholesale prices jump. But it also means households are slow to see warning signs. By the time the average creeps up enough to break through, the pain arrives suddenly, like this summer's double-digit hikes. For households, volatility is averaged away. For businesses, it shows up as a separate line item with a punishing logic of its own. Most households pay only for the energy they consume, the kilowatt hours multiplied by the retail rate. Businesses, however, live under a different rule. In addition to paying for energy, they must also pay for their peak demand. Utilities record the highest 15-minute, sometimes 30-minute interval a business draws in a billing cycle and bill a separate dollar per kilowatt demand charge on that peak, in addition to energy. The underlying logic is easy to follow. The grid cannot be sized to handle only the average draw. It must accommodate the maximum. A grocery store might average 50 kilowatts over an hour, but if all the refrigeration compressors roar to life on a hot afternoon and the draw surges to 200 kilowatts, the wires and transformers serving that store must be built to carry the higher load. Demand charges are designed to recover the cost of keeping that extra capacity available. Yet in practice, these charges often dominate the bill in ways that feel punitive. Imagine a family-run pizzeria in Newark. For most of the day, its electricity use is modest, but in the hour before the dinner rush, ovens, air conditioning, and refrigeration all run at once. That short spike locks in a demand charge that can rival the cost of the energy consumed across the entire month. Or take a mid-sized supermarket in Trenton. With dozens of compressors, lights, and HVAC systems, the draw during a heat wave can be immense. Even if that demand lasts only 15 minutes, the fee set in that quarter hour defines the bill for the next 4 weeks. The most extreme case is a DC fast-charging plaza for electric vehicles. Each charger can draw between 150 and 350 kilowatts. If 4 cars pull in together, the load can suddenly approach a megawatt, comparable to hundreds of homes switching on at once. A 4-stall, 250 kilowatt site that hits a 900 kilowatt monthly peak can see a demand charge of $10 to $20 per kilowatt hour, or $9,000 to $18,000, even if it sold only a modest amount of energy. For early-stage industries like EV charging, this design is devastating. Revenue from a handful of drivers may not even cover the demand charge triggered by their session. It is the equivalent of a landlord charging rent based on the fire code's maximum occupancy of a restaurant, rather than the number of diners who actually show up. Businesses are not entirely helpless. Many blunt the sharpest peaks through ingenuity and investment. One defense is on-site batteries, charged slowly during off-peak hours when the grid is under less strain, then discharged during spikes so the grid sees a smoother profile. Others stagger operations, scheduling defrost cycles and motor starts so they don't coincide. DC fast-charging sites use software load management to throttle power, pacing sessions to avoid crossing punitive thresholds. These tactics blunt the worst peaks, but they shift system risk onto balance sheets least able to carry it. In spiky sectors, the demand tariff operates less like cost causation and more like a toll on innovation. The deeper design flaw mirrors wholesale pricing. At the wholesale level, a marginal peaker plant spikes the price for everyone. At the retail business level, a marginal spike in usage punishes the customer with a demand fee. Both mechanisms prioritize peaks over averages, both create volatility, and both shift risk onto the user. For households, the storm is hidden behind retail smoothing. For businesses, and especially for emerging sectors like EV charging, the storm arrives every month as an unpredictable bill. By midsummer of 2025, the numbers hardened into headlines. Wholesale electricity prices in New Jersey had risen by roughly 20%, driven by higher clearing prices in PJM's auctions and by capacity costs inching upward in parallel. For most families, those details never surfaced. All they knew was that the bills landing in their mailboxes or inboxes were suddenly heavier than expected. What had long felt like a predictable line item became a source of anxiety and resentment. Governor Phil Murphy understood the danger. Energy costs cut deeper than abstract debates. They arrive as a subtraction from paychecks already stretched by mortgages, tuition, healthcare, and groceries. When they spike, they can topple political fortune. Murphy's explanation was clear: blame PJM. The regional operator, he argued, had dragged its feet on connecting new renewable generation to the grid. The interconnection backlog had stranded hundreds of projects that could have supplied clean, low-cost energy to New Jersey households. Instead, demand was being met by older, costlier units, pushing wholesale averages higher. The governor framed it as a supply-side choke point. The resources existed, but the bureaucracy failed to deliver them in time. That argument resonated with Democrats, but it did little to comfort ratepayers facing bills they could not avoid. And in a state with pending gubernatorial elections, the timing was brutal. Murphy was term-limited. The political fallout fell on his would-be successor, Representative Sherrill, who quickly found herself forced to define her campaign in terms of electricity prices. Sherrill confronted the pain head-on. She pledged to freeze utility rates for 1 year, declaring a state of emergency on day one. The average New Jersey family, she promised, would not see an increase during that period. She paired this with a push to increase in-state supply, more rooftop and community solar, batteries, and uprates at existing nuclear plants, with targeted modernization at gas facilities where needed. The goal was to flood the system with new supply while protecting families from immediate shocks. The plan is bold and complicated. Freezing rates in a PJM state means someone must absorb the difference. Utilities can't eat losses indefinitely. The state would have to cover the gap through subsidies or deferred recovery. Skeptics call it a political band-aid. Costs delayed are costs nonetheless. But the promise is simple, and simplicity has power. Your bill won't rise this year. Republican challenger Jack Ciattarelli chose a different tack. He went after the state's clean energy ambitions directly. Offshore wind, he argued, was the culprit, expensive, unnecessary, imposed by elites. He vowed to ban new offshore wind projects, rewrite the state's energy master plan, and restore a balanced mix of gas and nuclear. At rallies, turbines became a symbol of overreach and resentment. But beneath the catharsis sat a practical void. Nuclear plants take a decade or more to plan, permit, and finance. New gas plants face the same PJM bottlenecks as renewables. Neither will lower next summer's bills. Cancelling wind while gesturing at gas and nuclear is demonization standing in for timelines. The contrast is stark. Sherrill's plan has holes. A rate freeze is blunt, subsidies are expensive, permitting is slow, but it operates in the realm of the possible. Ciattarelli's vision offers villains and delay. In many ways, the choice mirrors the national divide. One side frames energy as a challenge of capacity and coordination. The other frames it as a morality tale, with renewables cast as the villain. Both promise lower bills. Only one offers levers a governor can pull in a single term. What's missing from both is a granular acknowledgement of what the state can do in the next 12 months. Reform punitive demand charges for early-stage electrification businesses, accelerate utility-level distribution interconnections, and, most crucially, scale distributed supply that bypasses PJM's queue. In the absence of specifics, voters choose between action with flaws and catharsis without mechanics. There are limits to what New Jersey can do inside PJM. Wholesale auctions, capacity rules, and transmission interconnections are regional and federal. A governor cannot order PJM to clear more renewables, nor can the state unilaterally change capacity obligations. The system resists state-level tinkering, but the state is not powerless. It controls distributed energy resources. Rooftop solar, community solar arrays, parking lot canopies, and behind-the-meter batteries connect to the distribution grid, not the high-voltage system PJM manages. That means they can be deployed quickly at scale without waiting in a multi-year interconnection queue. Think of PJM as the interstate highway. Every truck, no matter how urgent, must merge onto the same crowded on-ramps. Distributed solar is the network of neighborhood streets, smaller in capacity, but able to carry local traffic directly. When enough cars use side streets, the interstate eases. In energy terms, every rooftop that produces its own power reduces what New Jersey must pull from PJM at peak. This is not theoretical. New Jersey already runs one of the country's strongest community solar programs. Scaling up is not a question of invention, but of will. Note one crucial timing point. PJM's 5 coincident peaks often occur late afternoon to early evening. Standalone solar fades then. Pairing solar with storage is what turns kilowatts at noon into capacity at 5 to 8 p.m. Picture a rooftop surge, 500 megawatts of new distributed solar plus 1 gigawatt-hour of community and residential storage. On the ground, that's 62,500 homes with 8 kilowatt systems, about 2% of households, plus a network of community arrays on schools, warehouses, and parking lots. The price tag, $1.5 to $2.25 billion, is capital, not recurring expense. The 30% federal ITC, with direct pay for public non-profit hosts, immediately reduces net cost by $500 to $700 million. A state clean energy bank can issue green bonds for the rest, repaid by avoided capacity charges, wholesale revenues from aggregated batteries, and on-bill repayments from households. PJM clears at the margin, and the curve steepens in the last few hundred megawatts. Shaving 500 megawatts off New Jersey's peaks can reduce LMPs by roughly $5 to $15 per megawatt hour on typical hot afternoons and $20 to $50 per megawatt hour on scarcity days. If storage is dispatched during PJM's 5 CP hours, New Jersey can cut its capacity bill by $60 million per year at recent RPM prices, enough to service roughly a $1 billion bond. PJM is a pool. Wholesale prices are regional, not state-specific. When New Jersey shaves its peak, it lowers clearing prices for everyone, including Pennsylvania steel mills and Maryland data centers. The spillover cuts both ways. New Jersey lowers prices for Pennsylvania today, just as Pennsylvania's additions can lower New Jersey's tomorrow. The present problem is an asymmetry of effort. The political task is to explain why enough benefits remain in state: avoided capacity, local resilience, reduced congestion, to justify the investment. A layered finance stack makes the $2.25 billion manageable. Green bonds. Via the state's infrastructure, the Green Bank, $800 million to $1 billion, serviced by avoided capacity plus market revenues. Federal ITC direct pay, $500 to $700 million net. On-bill financing tied to the meter, $400 million revolving, repaid from savings. Community-scale batteries, solar earning, PJM ancillary, and capacity revenues. No single actor bears the full load. All share the benefit. Adoption should be opt-out, not opt-in. Standardized packages get one-day permits. HOAs can't veto panels absent structural issues. Large commercial roofs are presumed solar-ready unless proven otherwise. Roll out in tranches, 100 megawatts per quarter for 5 quarters to match installer capacity and build momentum. This is the missing plank in the campaign. Sherrill gestures at supply but not scale or finance. Ciattarelli dismisses renewables without acknowledging that distributed resources bypass the bottlenecks he decries. Concept assembly line can say exactly what 500 megawatts means, how many rooftops, how much capital, how it's paid for, and what it saves. So voters aren't left choosing between a freeze and a fantasy. Trump likes to sneer at climate policy as the Green New Scam. The phrase sticks because it leans on half-truths, volatility in markets, fragile early-stage business models, high upfront capital. The projection is the point. The real scam is the pretense that permanence can be built on private balance sheets alone. Every private firm lives under a hard law. Insolvency is fatal. A supermarket that cannot cover demand charges shuts down. A charging plaza that cannot recoup its bills closes. Even utilities must satisfy bondholders and regulators. If revenues sit below obligations for too long, bankruptcy follows. No firm, however visionary, can operate indefinitely at negative equity. The state is not a firm. As the monopoly issuer of its currency, the federal government cannot run out of dollars. It can mismanage real resources, labor, steel, copper, land, but not the unit of account it creates. Fiat capacity is not an excuse for waste. It is the authority to mobilize real resources up to the limit of labor and materials. That makes the state the insurer of permanence. Think of energy infrastructure as an insurance pool. Every rooftop, turbine, and substation is a policy against scarcity. In the private market, the premiums are wholesale revenues. When zero marginal cost power floods the stack and prices crash, the premiums disappear. Only the state can keep the pool solvent when project-level math doesn't add up. History proves it. TVA, Bonneville, Hoover, built because the nation needed permanence, and only public finance could carry a half-century payback. The Green New Deal wasn't unrealistic, it was unfinished. It named the scale of the crisis, but left the backstop implicit. The public guarantee is not a radical add-on, it's the precondition for abundance. We began with a family staring at a bill that rose without reason. Wholesale volatility is buried in averages. Demand charges lurk in commercial tariffs. PJM's capacity auctions live in trade journals. By the time numbers hit a bill, the story has already been written. When the Trump administration clawed back $13 billion in planned infrastructure investment, it wasn't prudence. It shifted risk from a balance sheet that cannot go bankrupt to households and businesses that can. Dollars are not scarce for a currency issuer. What is scarce are turbines, copper, trained line workers, corridors for transmission, the real resources those dollars could have mobilized. Refusing to spend didn't save taxpayers. It denied citizens the infrastructure that would have kept future bills lower. That is the real scam, not the Green New Deal, not rooftop solar, not batteries in basements. The scam is pretending that refusing to govern is discipline when it is the most expensive choice of all. New Jersey's rooftop surge is mitigation, not cure. States can finance distributed resources, streamline adoption, and build resilience. They cannot rewrite PJM's market design. They cannot issue the currency. State action buys time. Federal action builds permanence. So we return to that bill in northern New Jersey. It is higher than it should be, not because the sun failed to shine or the wind failed to blow, but because those entrusted with fiat power chose not to use it. The surge plan shows what states can do now. The cure lies where it always has, in Washington, where dollars are created and permanence can be ensured. The bill is the evidence. The ballot is the response. Please subscribe to keep the content coming. It costs you nothing, but makes all the difference.